There's something I need to talk to you about that, right?
Could be.
About that.
We're gonna change that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you talk to Joe?
We agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know anything right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that was the other to change. All right.
Late.
He keeps asking, I said,
I call this meeting to order the ad hoc construction committee. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve
We start questioning
the
them?
minutes from the October 11th meeting. Motion by Phil and seconded by Terry to approve the minutes. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by aye. Aye. Yes. Minutes are approved. So, got some things that I'm gonna throw out here to you guys. The first thing on here is to set a budget. The reason why this come up is because, I've done some checking with board members on the proposed cost of your suggestions.
Yep.
And it will not pass the board.
Yep.
It absolutely will not pass the board. So, what I'm going to suggest to you is that we limit or set a budget. The reason why it's not gonna pass is because it's too much money for this county. It's
Understood.
gonna impose, it's just, we can't afford it.
Understood.
Simple as that. So, with that in mind, I would like to, propose a budget of 25 million for this project. And I have some other things that, I would like to add in with that for your consideration. One of them is that you probably, or if not, we are in the process of buying the clinic by the hospital, the old clinic building, which was vacated when, the hospital was established. That being said, and this is, this is purely in a suggestive state right now, but, it would be, it could be possible that we could move HHS to that clinic building, which would vacate the entire second floor.
Okay.
This would conceivably open up some additional square footage for you, to come up with a plan that could fall within the budget that I'm suggesting. And also, I did some checking on this as far as the number of beds. For 23 up to date, we have an average population, inmate population of 28. And for basically, for the last 7 years, our average jail population was 35. So I don't feel as though a 70+ bed count is necessary. I don't know how you all feel, but I don't feel that's necessary. I'm suggesting, the bed count is 60.
60 is the max, or 60 is where you start with the ability to double bump beyond that?
Yes, 60 would be the, where we could possibly double bunk if need be.
The 60 beds would be if you're double bumped.
No,
60 bed would be where you start and you want to be able to double bunk in addition.
if need be, yes.
Okay.
Am I leaving anything out?
That's all we discussed.
Is there a minimum
probably asking the wrong person, because I'm a male-female thinking person. So, for me, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and that's how they should be taken. I'm not into this woke business of whatever.
There's other factors involved in classification on it, just that.
Such as,
Co-conspirators, you have 6 come in, you have to separate them.
We're all involved in the same case.
okay,
So it's
They
not
can't be together.
just that.
Aggressive personality. Mental health.
Mental health is a
Trans.
medical health.
well, here again, I mean, we're still looking at, like I said, for the last 7 years, we had an average, inmate population of about 35. So, if it's sitting at 35 for 7 years, I don't see that it's gonna double. I really don't. Anybody can walk, you guys can, put your 2 cents in, don't be afraid.
Well, my feeling's been, the interest alone on a $50 million debt, for over 20 years, you get 29, 30 million.
It's out of the question, we cannot. afford
Interest
that.
alone,
It would put us in a bad,
not let alone pay back the principal.
yeah,
And that's, and my thoughts are, if we're gonna spend $29 million a year on interest, we could afford to spend, not 20 million a year, but roughly it comes out to $1.5 million a year over 20 years. The interest. If you can afford to spend $1.5 million a year on interest, the county could just as well spend $1.5 million a year on out of county housing for all those special cases. With no remodeling or destruction of anything. If it requires an extra officer or 2 per year to do transport and whatever else, that's still a long ways from $1.5 million a year. That's my thoughts on it. There's no way we're gonna be able to accommodate all 17 classifications that the state has come up with.
no, I agree. It's going to impose a financial hardship.
Well, my feeling is too, we have 17 or 19 board members here. We're supposed to decide whether we're gonna invest that sum of money, load on the taxpayers. I think rather than us 19 members being, sharing that burden, we put it up to a referendum, let the taxpayers decide if they want to fund that seismic project.
I know exactly where that would go. Plus, it's not just our current day taxpayers that this is gonna be, put on, it's gonna be their children, and then their grandchildren. This is gonna go for a while, and it won't get paid off in a couple of years, obviously. So,
Go ahead.
Aren't we currently accommodating the 17 classifications and everything?
No.
No. So if they're come in and they don't meet one of them, you ship them out,
We ship others out to make
room for
that situation.
But we really don't, we are in trouble with the state every year on our inspection because we're not classifying properly. And that's all, that was probably the number 1 reason of this, of building the jail, is to get in compliance with the state. So.
Go back to Tom's question at the beginning, I was interested in what formula you used to come up with the proposal you had originally. Cause like I said, this is gonna be a hard sell, if it goes to a referendum, we might as well go home right now.
Yeah.
So we have to come up with something that will work and be saleable. So I was just wondering what kind of formula you did use to come up with that 20 years down the road, or whatever it was, 30?
You look at, past data, average, how that, the increase of over that time. 7 years ago, you might have started at 20, then last year, how that increased over time, and you just project that out. It's not obviously a perfect science. And then the other things, we do include the classification factor. You have come in, what you call it a maintenance factor of having to relocate certain individuals when classification changes. Cause you may have 3 on one classification and tomorrow you might have 1 or something else, maybe influx, where you have to start, moving people around, so you need that as well. Your bed count, we're talking about 60 beds, but typically they wanna see only 85% of that is filled at one time, so you're not at 60 beds, you're subtracting that, so that's also a factor that we include into that projection.
I have a question for Tom. You mentioned that the county can't afford this, what number are you referencing?
For the jail itself, the 47 million,
Okay.
plus,
Sure.
likely.
And I don't know if anyone in this room disagrees with that this county probably can't afford something in the mid to high 40s. I don't think anyone's gonna disagree with you, on that. I just have, 2 questions. Does this committee agree that our jail is close to end of life?
I would say probably it could stand to be improved, yes.
Does this committee agree that if the county decides to build a new jail in 1 to 5 years, that it's going to cost more money to build it then than it actually will now?
I think that probably goes without saying, the way things are going.
So if we, let's say we build a 60-bed jail for, I'm just gonna say 40 million. I don't know what it would be. Can we safely assume and all agree that in 3 to 5 years, if we build a 60-bed jail, it's gonna be 45 to 50 million? Probably. I mean, nothing has gone down in price over the last 100 years. So when the county board or the jail ad hoc committee or the finance committee in 3 to 5 years, I can foresee this happening. Well, why didn't they do this 5 years ago when they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on hiring these people? Now it's gonna cost us $5 to $10 million more dollars. I'm just throwing that scenario out there. Totally on board with you that this county cannot or shouldn't probably spend $45 to $50 million, because that's gonna put us, I think, in a hole that we probably can't dig out of.
We're struggling now, you know that as well as I do, so.
But I also think that with fiscal responsibility in mind, that if we keep pushing this off and off and off and off and off, it's just gonna get more expensive and more expensive and more expensive.
I guess I just don't see that we have to go, I don't understand why it is that we can just, upgrade the existing facility, have the additional room, like I said, we can vacate that 2nd floor, it's a possibility, use that additional square footage.
But if we use that 2nd floor still, we'd still have a linear jail and not a pod system.
And maybe that's what we're gonna have to live with.
I don't know if structurally it'll hold either.
And I don't know that brings another question to mind too, is that I'm not totally convinced that this pod system is gonna only be run by 3 employees. And I think if you talk to some of the other people that have these systems in place right now, that they may agree with that. So when you're throwing out that 3 employee number, sounds great on paper, but I think when it comes down to it, I think there are additional employees that are needed to run that facility, that pod facility.
I forget, did any of you guys go to Green Bay? You did? No?
Not Green Bay, Whitehall.
Okay, because we did tour jails on that Green Bay tour of the pod system, there was 3 employees. that ran that whole operation. Which is the same number that we would have.
And isn't that what Whitehall is too?
Correct.
And when we toured that, didn't you say, well, they were building a justice center with 2 courtrooms, one for the future and the pod jail, and a justice center. And if I remember right, correct me on this, that they started this 3 years ago, and the total cost was 45 million for the whole kit and caboodle, and the cost of the jail alone roughly is 25 million, and in just 3 years, it's just skyrocketing costs and everything. Isn't that what?
What are we running our current system with now? 3?
Yeah.
So why would that change if we added some additional beds, even if it were linear?
George?
We're getting staff on both sides of the building, now it's just double your staff.
Well, I mean, that would be a design factor that would have to.
But you're placing linear, which means they have all these hallways that they have to, and they have to go to each and every cell every 40 minutes or whatever, and keep making the rounds in there, and it's just.
I get what you're saying, but people aren't building linear jails anymore. They're building the pods, so you can.
Which I understand, and I agree, the pod, it's cool, it's nice, it's beautiful, like I said, if I could become a criminal, I would go into the pod system, because it's a great facility, but I don't believe, number one, I don't believe criminals should, have luxuries, a lot of luxuries. I think they're there because they cannot operate within the limits of the law. So I don't see why we should give them exercise rooms or TVs or that kind of thing. See, that's my personal feeling. I understand, yes, maybe the state mandates that this has to be that way, but for me, I don't feel that that's the way to handle a criminal.
And the purpose of building a new facility, even if it was a pod system, isn't to make it nice for the inmates, it's to make it easier for the employees to see all the inmates at the same time.
Couldn't we achieve the same goal with cameras?
We do have cameras, yeah, in our jail.
And if we were to go with like an extension of our existing facility, couldn't we, put in additional cameras to cover those areas?
But you still have to do so many rounds per hour.
Still have to have people to people.
So
So if you have 3 people in there now, if you have one person do these rounds, you still have 2 people at the command center.
Right, so right now, if we built a larger linear jail, it would take the jail staff much longer to do rounds because they're walking down all of these hallways. When in a pod system, they can get done in a quarter amount of time by making that circle. It's just easier on staff.
And it's a safety issue.
And safety, yeah.
Yeah, the linear is, you don't know until you turn that corner what's there. If something would happen, the door didn't get shut, or something broke, and they're out and waiting for you.
Lots of blind spots.
A lot of blind spots.
Again, like I was saying, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm missing the obvious, but.
And you're old school, Tom. I
I'm
get
old
it.
school, and
I get it.
but I still think that we have cameras all over the place, and they do a lot of good, things for observation, surveillance. Why can't that work for this?
So let's say we spend $25,000 on more cameras. Our jail is still just as old, and we still have to build a new jail in 1 to 5 years. And it's gonna be, we don't know how much more expensive. It's going to be more expensive than what we can build today.
Well, I understand your point, but frankly, I think it's moot, because it's not gonna pass the board. And it sure as heck is not gonna go through a public referendum.
You're saying the 40-some million isn't gonna pass the board?
Absolutely not.
No.
I don't disagree with you. You're
I'm
spot
telling you
on.
that right now.
You're spot on, 100% spot on.
And
But-
so then where do we go from there?
Well,
We're
I
just gonna be
also-
spinning our wheels.
I think we also like the idea of, you guys didn't come here today and say, you're not getting in jail, not happening.
No, I'm not saying that.
Right, no, and that's, we all like that you're not saying that, but we don't disagree with you that 45 to 49 million is out of the question.
So I think we need to let Corey and Kurt go back with your 60 beds.
And the 25 million.
Well,
But here's what I thought when we left last meeting, it was we needed to cut that number, and I think you guys went back and worked on that, is that not correct?
Correct. Well, there's a couple things in play here. Since the last time we met as a committee, we then had the board meeting where we were talking about potential letter to the city. And then there was also some questions raised by board members about the number, right? So I left the board meeting, whatever that was, 2 weeks ago, without clear direction, but you connect the dots, that the number that was presented to you is too large of a number, right? Obviously what Tom's stating today, and that the direction from the board is that there's no interest in pursuing closure of mining, was apparent from what happened there. So I had given Corey direction, we're gonna have to look at a skywalk solution, because all of the other ones didn't meet the criteria. But hearing the feedback from you today is feedback that we need from the committee, right? That we need to cut scope, and that was some of the questions I was gonna ask you, of where do we wanna cut scope and how severe are the cuts gonna be? I will give you my 2 cents on the second floor. Is that I don't think that it would be advisable for a county to move in the direction of spending millions of dollars to upgrade and keep a linear jail by just adding on additional cells. There are things liability-wise that complicate that, meaning, but first of all, we need to find out if the structure will support adding a jail function, because there's a lot of live load and obviously dead load that has to be able to support the structure, because we're dealing with.
Plus a lot of penetration.
There's a lot that goes into that, right? And sometimes remodeling of that space is not cost effective compared to building new. The second floor could be something that we direct venture to say, can that second floor become some element of jail support? The thing that complicates that is your jail support, a lot of that you want that to be on ground level, because it comes right out, booking, all those elements, kitchen, laundry, all those sorts of things, right? But we can definitely explore this additional square footage that would be on second floor. Does that help something for it to stay here on this campus, right? Because all the time we've looked at that is we would have to displace people. The first thing that went to my mind is if you're gonna displace people, does that second floor become a home for some of those other people? If you're gonna take people off of campus, we have to look at it differently, right? 25 million, I'm gonna tell you right now, will be a challenge. I guess the direction that I can tell you is we're gonna do everything we can to reduce the budget. And I know you guys have to give us a tipping point as to what the board members would approve. What I would ask is that give us the leeway to revisit reducing the size of the pod, reducing the size of the housing unit to 60 beds, right? With the ability to flex or make it larger. The reason that Kyle asked about classification is that's a huge piece in regards to cost, right? Because as we start to look at how many times that donut is broken up into pieces to get to something that's 15 to 20 classifications, the cost changes when we start going back to say that it's somewhere between 8 to 12. Just because there's elements in there that affect cost. Those are decisions that have to be made by the county. It will potentially complicate the future. I understand the position in regards to how conservative people look at the view of classification, and I don't disagree that the view there is consistent with certain parts of our society, but the reality is it doesn't change that your jail staff have to deal with that, right? It doesn't change that. But I understand that when we presented these numbers, I knew these were numbers that you couldn't afford. But I will go back to what I shared with you at the last committee meeting, is that this was tying in with the program. This was giving you the 3 options that we looked at and what the dollars would be, and the next step would be where are we cutting and how can we avoid cuts. That's how we left our last committee meeting. So today, that's what we're getting from you, is here's where we wanna see you make some revisions, here's where we wanna make some cuts. We're fully prepared to do so, but I wanna caution you is that 25's gonna be tough, right?
I understand that.
We'll do everything in our effort to cut costs. We want to have something that your community and your board supports. At the end of the day, that's what we wanna do. But
That's
we-
what that's gonna happen.
Right, but we also don't wanna shortcut you so that in 5 to 10 years, you're saying, why didn't those guys warn us? And when we give you warnings, it's not to be just opposition, it's not. We're gonna give you warnings and say, watch out for this, watch out for that, and how do we get to that point? So, if your direction to us is look at 60 beds, cut the budget as much as we can by potentially looking at second floor, we can look at that. You know, we do have some skywalk updates, I don't know if it makes sense to do it, cause what we're showing there today is not gonna be in the realm of budget, in regards to where we're talking today.
I don't know if the board would support this dialogue either.
But understood.
I'm just saying.
Yep,
Even
understood.
the cost alone, obviously, for that one use, and we agree, that's why we presented not to do that. Yeah, that's a huge cost for that.
I have a question. It seems to be like 60 beds was the magic number. I don't know. Currently, we have what, capacity for 51?
52.
52? Okay. So now you wanna up it to 60 with a double bunk capability on a certain number. When our population's been down in the, just say an average of, even if it's an average of 35, you know, if you had a pod, I don't know, what's the smallest pod system you can build?
You can make them as small as you want to, yeah.
Well, so I'm saying, you know, why make it 60 beds with a double bunk capability, when you might be able to say, we'll build a 40-bed pod with double bunk capabilities.
I understand, I think, again, going back to community support, I don't think that it would be the best approach to say we're gonna spend millions of dollars on a jail that's smaller the day we open than the one that we currently have, right? So if you wanted to say we're gonna match our current number, and then we're going to allow for expansion, I think makes the most sense, rather than retracting the number, you know what I mean?
That's fine, I understand that, but I just wondered where the 60 number come from, because we currently aren't even using the 51 all the time, majority of the time.
Yeah, and
So, design a 50-bed capacity that you wanna call with double bunk capabilities, however you wanna call it. It doesn't decrease the number of, what you might call it, inmates you can hold. But now how you distribute them was according to the classification system, but, you know, $1.5 million a year in interest really doesn't turn me on.
I understand, and I understand the interest conversation. I think something that you need to be aware of, because your comment about interest versus out-of-county expense is not, it's not a comment that we haven't heard before in other counties, right? Cause you're balancing, we're gonna spend less money if we would just do out-of-county housing versus just the interest that we're borrowing. You need to understand that if any out-of-county expense that you would then burden the county with, this now has to be on your operating side. So what that does is that's a snowball effect in regards to all of the things that you're having a hard time paying for right now. And you're comparing two numbers, but the numbers can't be compared equally, is my point.
I understand, because on a new jail, you can get, what you call a capsule borrowing.
Correct.
Capsule,
Yep.
which, you know, but agreeing with that.
Yes.
You still have to pay the capsule borrowing back.
Agreed, and I agree with you, but I also want you to understand that the message to the taxpayers, because when the interest arguments come out, and I'm not saying that you're creating an argument, but the argument will come when we get to our public meetings, where the public will say, this is how much interest we're paying. If you went and talked to a large portion of your population that's in your county, and I granted there are some that don't have to deal with this, they have a mortgage on a property that they've owned and they're paying interest on it, right? And it's something that they have to do to be able to provide themselves a home, right? And the element of that is that you guys are going to get a much better interest rate than the homeowner would be right now. So that's the piece that's tied into that. It's part of our society, right? if you guys had the ability, that your operating money, you had excess that you could just start stacking, let's say that you had $1 million of excess and you started stacking it in the bank, you would be 30 years away from, 25 years away from being able to build your jail, but your need is now. That's the part that you've gotta be able to, it's not an easy communication piece, but that's.
Well, that being said, people are, people are still gonna have their mortgage.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're talking about adding additional fees onto their tax roll.
Understood.
So,
I get it, I get all of
Yeah.
that. So, being able to keep it as inexpensive as possible is always the goal. But it's also managing, how does it serve you long range for the next 50 years?
I've got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've got a question. We really don't have a 52-bed capacity because of these 17, 19 rules and stuff. So by going to the pod, it's gonna open it up, so we should be able to have less numbers. By more single cells instead of dorms and hallway, whatever they're called. But have more individual capacity with a double bunking would stretch us a lot farther. My figure originally was 40 to 45 than the 52 right now, because that's really not 52 beds under the rules we gotta play by.
Right.
If they're designed to fit those rules, we should be able to get away with less beds than space than we have right now, is what I'm thinking, so.
But also, I mean, like I said, for the last 7 years, we averaged 45. We have a 52 capacity, so we are not utilizing 17 spaces, which gives us some movement there as well.
But we can't because we got all the dormitories.
Yeah, the dorm becomes a problem.
You're not ever going to be 100%
Yeah.
capacity.
The more inmates that are in our jail, like right now, the more inmates that are in our jail, the more we are out of compliance. The more rules we're breaking with the DOC.
Back to your one comment before about the jail's outdated. I think from what I'm hearing, the jail's more outdated because of regulations,
Yeah.
not because of structure.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
Change the rules.
Yeah.
That's what's happened.
It's a big piece of it, but the design of your jail originally has caused some of those complications that
Yeah,
you've dealt with from
I
day
accept
one.
that, but, you know, a lot of people out there say, well, the jail's not that old, it should be able to last, but then trying to explain to them that the rules change, you know, and that's more harmful for continuing this existence than.
And a side note from the money portion, every single time that we hear house out of county makes us nervous. Because every single time an inmate leaves that jail, it's dangerous for that deputy that's transporting them and for the community. Ideally, if there's anything we can possibly do, we wanna keep inmates in our jail and not transport them. Because the second they leave that jail, it's dangerous for us in the community. So we kinda cringe when we hear how is out of county, cause it's gonna create so many transports. And it's gonna create so many more opportunities for that inmate to do harm to that deputy or escape, that it makes us nervous. They can't harm the community when they're in jail.
Well, I guess, I think we need to explore it further on a reduced size
Yeah.
pod system.
I completely support that, because go back to the phase that we're in, is getting to a project that we know, or we feel as though we have support from the board to move forward with it, and now we're gonna communicate to the community why the board is considering that. If day one, when we start this message, the website and the community meetings, that we don't have support from the board, it's a waste of time. It's an absolute waste of time. But again, the number, I think if we focus on the revised scope that you have, we look at different options of what could be utilized for existing facility renovation versus a reduced housing unit. If we go through that exercise, would be this first step, and then come back with some ideas and thoughts on a couple of different options that we can explore with you, understanding we are changing the scope significantly. The other thing that when you get into renovation, I know we've got space and individuals, feel that is a more cost-effective approach, and sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It would potentially impact the operation of the jail, depending on what we do on the second floor. When you start to add phases in there to add cost, so we'll manage or adjust all of that so we can communicate to you what that would look like in each scenario.
Looking at this too, because we already mentioned, you're not closing down minor, we're not doing the skywalk, so where is this gonna be located? I know it's on your agenda. Is there a location that's preferred? I know we talked about the east side, we talked about the south side, demoing existing building, is there a preference that way as well?
I guess, that would be up to what, you come up with as far as the design within our cost lines. If it works better on the south side, and, that would be.
It just, again, the factor, we do it on the south side, now we're also having the factor of demoing an existing building. So, again, we're limited to the budget, we're trying to, where we can go.
On the east side,
And-
there's.
Corey, or just to, Tommy, I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no,
just
sorry.
to confirm what you're saying here, when you say south side of this block, correct, or south side of Minor, south of Minor?
No, south side of this building.
Okay,
The south
so,
building.
and I just recognize there may be a misunderstanding of that term. So what Corey is talking about is an option that I think it was option C, when we had all of those options on the development of the east side of the property. All but one included closing down Third.
We do not want it, not.
Right, and that one option C was taking out where forestry is, I believe, right, is it forestry, that's Corey's reference to south side option. Now, there is the south property option as well, without closing down Minor, and without a crosswalk, or a skywalk, which would require physical inmate transport over for any kind of court that would have to happen. So, we can look at all of those. We can look at a couple of them. So we're just trying to get a better understanding of,
Well,
do we proceed at all looking at any, the parking lot to the south?
I just oversimplifying this, maybe I am, but, so, jail is currently third floor. Second floor, okay. And the court system is on the third. Third, yeah, okay, so, and there's an elevator now. Where they transfer inmates up to the third floor for. So, if you went on the east side.
I know where you're going with it, and that's one of the options that I want to take a look at, go on the east side and build, say, a housing pod. I don't think you're gonna be able to, structurally, I don't think the second floor will be able to hold a housing, just because of the weight of it. But, as Kurt mentioned, jail support, we may be able to get some in there, so if you got a housing pod on each side, the connection probably would, and as we're going through some absorbing of what's all being discussed, the path would probably be from the housing pod on the east side to the existing jail elevator through that second floor. You'd have that secure corridor there, and then you go up from there to the courts.
it's like if you build a housing pod on the east side, can't you have an elevator from that housing pod right up to the court? Cause the courtroom's on that
But then you're
side.
renovating the third floor, additional work to get them into the courts.
Well, you open up some walls and stuff, but
It's not that simple.
The way it would come in would be coming in right there on the end where the judge's chamber's in, which would almost require you to flip-flop the courtroom, so the judge's chambers would be on the other side. So that's a remodeling of that, half of that third floor.
Which again, with 25, we don't have that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing from you guys is, you're okay if it's on this block, or if it's across the street with no skywalk? No, okay,
No, we don't want it across the street.
nothing, you want it on this?
You want it on this.
We want it right here on this campus.
Okay. That's what we're, okay.
I still think the east side option probably would be the most, flexible and could, even with remodeling, I still think that, you could accommodate on the east side with just the housing unit on that, parking lot area, if you wanna call
So
it.
then, would we want parking then to the south on the block adjacent? So we're gonna lose parking?
Parking can be across the street like it is now, we also have that church lot.
Yep.
I mean, there's ample parking area for courthouse. And there's parking across the street here. Now, there's no shortage of parking if we gobble up that east side.
So then, to clarify further, any development on this existing block, on this campus, we'll call it, in the studies that we look at, are we allowed to, demo any part of an existing building currently, i.e. the south option where forestry is? Or is the direction that, because that would displace people currently other than HHS, other than the clinic option?
I guess that, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If that had needed to happen.
Yep.
Would you utilize the entire second floor, or could forestry possibly, use some of
Go
that
up to the
space?
second floor.
Yeah,
That's what they would have to work out, like what Kyle was saying.
Yeah.
Look at those options.
Are we limited by the
I don't
direction of the
think that-
committee to just work in the parking lot, basically?
if that needed to happen, a demolition like that, and if we can still keep it within the suggested budget, I would certainly have any problem with that. I don't know about anybody else, but.
I think when you start looking at the various options that they're talking about, keep it on this thing, I think the price may go above the 25 million, depending on what, how much demolition there is, what remodeling, restructuring, whether it'll bear the weight or not. So I think you have to have the flexibility that maybe it comes up to 30 million, whatever, when you design this, depending on
And I
the
think that's what
parameters.
Kurt was alluding to.
I guess, the message that I'm getting from you is it needs to be as cost effective as possible, right? We're gonna do what we can to limit the amount of work that has to be done in a couple of scenarios, and we'll put a price to it, and then come back here. So, I think the message is clear of where we need to go, so.
Is that gonna be based on, say, a 50 bed then, 45 bed?
We'll do what we can to get the bed count where we need. You mentioned 60 beds and double bunk, maybe it may end up
Yeah.
going down to 50 and 20 double bunk in the future, so we'll look at that, and the space that we can utilize.
If we do like say just scenario 50 bed, so does every one of those beds have the capability of going to a double bunk? You can't go to 100 then, right?
Not necessarily, no, because you can't double bunk every cell. Sorry, Department of Corrections has limitations on that as well. They have 15% of cells, have to be singles. Also, 15%.
You got ADA issues as well.
ADA issues, you also have, special needs requirements, if you have special needs beds, those typically are not double bunk, they're singles. So, again, we are adjusting the scope of each, getting to Kyle's mention of classification, how many are gonna be able to accommodate?
So you said 15%?
50% of cells have to be singles.
Okay, so, I mean, if you had a 50 bed facility, that means you have to have at least, say, 8 beds. 8 cells that are
Of that.
single.
Singles, and then you have that another 15% of capacity, for the relocation of classification that would come there.
So you're looking at 16, potentially 16 out of 50.
Out of the 50.
That leaves 34 that are individual, which is right at our average, or or slightly more than our average now. Not excluding the seniors.
That is pretty fine. And we can work through the calculus relative to, with what Corey is saying, the 15 single bed units, the 15, the factor, the 15% that DOC requires us. Having the target number of 60 helps us because as this gets laid out, depending on all of those different factors, it may be 58. We don't know. It just kind of, how all of the, we'll call it the Jenga blocks sort of fit in the piece. It might be slightly lower, and from what we've heard today, that could be an acceptable option to present. It isn't that 60 is that watermark that we have to be at that or above it. We'll look at it, and it'll help our planners when we're working on that, because a lot of times it's like, well, I've got 54. Well, okay, that might actually be worth it, having the Samuels group price out, because it seems to work, but we can double, if 54 starting, we can double bump beyond that, but that might be the right option because of how it fits on the site. And until we start working at that and looking at that, we won't know what that number is, but having that target is extremely helpful.
I would say, we don't want to vacate any streets.
Yep, and that's
Absolutely not.
That's very clear direction, and we appreciate that as well. Having those parameters makes it.
Right here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I think when you're doing this too, they're talking about now, I think you've got to plan for the future too, because we don't want in 5 years from now to think, oh, we're too small already. That's gotta be taken into account.
But I'm gonna consider right now, if you're putting the limitations at 25 million, you're not gonna have that in your account.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying, when you actually do this, it might be, say, 30 million when you get through with, doing stuff.
To Terry's point of the future stuff, I think it's really important because we don't want sheriff's department staff, county board members in 5, 10, 15 years thinking, why did they do this? But on top of that, does this committee at least agree to some point that the ability to make revenue for the county, for the new facility exists? Now, our main purpose, obviously, for a new jail is so we can be in compliance, and the safety of our staff. But that ability to create revenue for decades is going to exist. I'm not talking a 150 bed jail, I'm not talking a 200 bed jail, I'm not talking a 106 bed jail. But if we build a jail large enough that can accommodate our needs, we also have the ability to get into contract with other agencies in the state to make $100,000 to $500,000 a year for years and years and years. I think we really need to look at that option too, because that's going to take a lot of this financial burden that people are really concerned about and should be off of Rusk County and its taxpayers.
Well, and I think Kurt has mentioned this before, you don't go and construct a jail based on that alone. But again, we've got to do, the future, what are our needs, and maybe that isn't gonna be there. But, I think we've gotta look at the future, like you say, and like you said, 5 years from now, they say, well, it's too small already, why didn't they make it bigger? And it would be an added bonus if we could house, other things, but again, Kurt has mentioned that too, you don't go into designing it with that intent, because with laws changing and everything, who knows, that could change too.
Right.
My feeling on that is this, if we have a jail that can support our needs here for this county, that's what our goal should be. If we actually have extra space, that's a bonus for us. But I don't believe that we should actually build with the intent of housing other people. That should not be a part of the
Right.
equation.
Right, but I think, and it's not, but it's something I think, we all think that we should hopefully be looking at that as a bonus.
Well, anytime you can do something like that, it is a bonus, but I don't wanna see it built so that you kinda count on it, because you never know. I mean, a lot of these counties around us are building new jails, so their tendency to want to emit space from us, if you will, is gonna diminish.
But at the same time too, the last 50 years, counties throughout the state have been building new jails every year. It's not just, from 2021, and I get what you're saying, there are more jails being built relatively closer to us, and that's gonna continue for the next 200 years. Counties are gonna build new jails, they're gonna build new prisons. But there's never been, you look at Barron, I'll just use an example. Counties are building new jails around us, they're still housing a lot of out-of-county inmates and creating that revenue. But if we build a jail that's 45 beds or 50 beds, if you build a double bunk to 55 or 60, I don't think that.
Well, we're talking about actually Phil 60.
What?
We're talking about 60.
To
Up
start.
Up to 60, with double bunking up to, would that make it? Within the limits.
It depends upon how many cells we get. You're talking bed count and cell count is two different things. That's what we have to work on. So we're
Right,
starting
but I
with
mean,
60
if we,
beds.
like,
You may only.
hypothetically, if you were to say, that we're gonna do a 60 bed cell, or 60 bed unit.
60 bed unit.
Okay, so how many of those cells could,
That's not cell count. That's what I'm saying is, you're talking bed count and referring to cell count. If we stick with the 60 beds, that's,
Gonna
say
reduce
it's
the numbers.
40 cells
Yeah.
to 60, so that 40 cells, you have to put the 15%, you may only get 5 additional to get the 65. You're not,
Yeah, there's so many things.
there's so many factors that you have to play.
Like special needs, how many special needs beds are we gonna put in, that's gonna be a single cell that you can't double bunk, so that's why they need to lay that out in a couple different ways for you, and that's why the question of classification was driven, is that they may come back with an option that shows 12 classifications, and the number is gonna be different than if we come back with one that's 15. Right, so that's really what's gonna drive it along there.
So if I could just talk about the bed count, and you're using the average of 35 over the last 7 years or whatever it was. Well, let's go back 20 years. Where was the bed count at then? But kinda like everything else in this world, things go like this, depending on who's where, okay? We were at a point when we really started pushing this, that we were over and above 50 beds. We had in-house in Chippewa and Eau Claire County. And that's because we were on this swing. Things changed, different DA, different judges, it all changed, and now it's down. Like other things in life, if you go right now and look, the things that were happening in 1971 are happening right now. Okay? Because that's the way life is, everything happens that way. So, I don't want to just say, okay, it's 35 for 7 years, but we're projecting hopefully 20 years, 25, 30 years out. I'm not saying that it's gonna double, it may triple, I don't know that. Because if you come to our committee meetings, that crime rate is, and the violent crimes are increasing. And we're seeing that throughout the state. So, I'm not saying that we need 100 beds, I'm not saying, and I'm okay if you think that building 60 beds and being able to increase will be enough to get us to 25, 30 years. No problem. But I just don't want to do something that we're gonna regret 10 years down the road. Cause that's kinda where we are here. They cut the corners here when they built this, and where are we at? 30 years? And now here we are.
Well, even if they wouldn't have cut the corners 30 years down, this is 30 years later. Fact is, overriding considerations, the state should change the damn criteria.
Correct.
Correct.
And who's to say
And you-
you're not
and you
gonna
have no
change
control
some more
over that.
down the road?
And
You
have no
can't predict
control.
that.
You have no control of that.
No,
So, I just wanted my input on
which I understand, yeah,
Oh.
but I mean, if that were the case and that, you know, crime rose suddenly, again, if it went on the upswing, I mean, we still have the option of, you know, housing them in other counties. And granted, Phil's point, it's a valid point, I get it, but there are other counties that are doing it. And, you know, I don't know that there has been any issues with them transporting inmates. So, well, you know, it happens. Maybe it's not the most favorable condition, but it, obviously they're doing it and it's working
You know, we had,
without without problems.
in the recent past, we had a court violent criminal convicted, he's sitting in prison now for life. You know what I'm talking about, the officer that was killed. That inmate was not housed here,
Correct.
he was housed out of county.
Correct.
Because, well, for one thing, there was a lot of, emotion involved.
Correct, it was because it
All
was,
this stuff, but,
because of the
so as
involvement.
a result, they housed him out of county. We had to pay for that,
Correct. Correct.
and I suspect in the future, you're gonna have more cases like that.
I hope not.
No, but I mean, not that specific one, but
Well, we have
cases
one
where you
house
might
out
have
of
to
county
house
right now.
somebody else.
We have one out of county right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're still gonna have them, an occasional one here and there, I get that, that's still gonna happen. But when he was down there, and all the court was moved down there.
Right.
So that, it wasn't the back and forth.
Right, I know it wasn't transport, but the fact is that we couldn't afford to keep him here. For whatever, all the different reasons.
I got a question, and I'll go backwards, I'm most used to doing that. How did you price the Skywalk from where to where? You came up with $3 million for the Skywalk, how long was it, where did it go to and from?
So, again, we're still dealing with, preliminary design, but we went from this side of the street, where we actually had to put footings and foundations there to be able to carry that, across the street, so it's outside of where the sidewalk area was.
Okay.
And then that structure was then built there to be able to give the connection from the structural element. The exact distance, I don't remember the scale of that, but our estimating team had put that together.
And it was at least 60 feet.
Again, a lot of that was driven by it meeting detention grade, what we had to do for the structure to be able to support from both sides of it. There's elements in regards to displacement of that load on this foundation, so there was a sizable foundation that was put on each side of the building, so. Yeah, it's not cheap, territory, but, obviously that's not a consideration, so.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is if we come in here and we go on the south side, we're done. There's no other place for us to go in this block, really.
Right.
That's why I like the idea of going out there, building it, designing it, so there is a possibility to put another 30 beds on it, because we can't do that here anymore, I don't think. You know, that's one reason I've always favored that spot over there. So, cause we're done here.
Yeah,
And personally, I'll bet anybody wants to take me up on a steak dinner out at Jeff's, that second floor isn't gonna pass. By the time you pour all those toilets, plumbing, 6-inch concrete walls this far apart, it ain't gonna take it. I mean, I've been building stuff long enough that,
structurally I have my concerns, but we'll look into it.
cause when you start drilling holes, you're gonna possibly hit rebar, which is gonna, not that spot, but it's gonna be this spot.
It's an idea, but it probably won't work. But we have everyone's had a ton of ideas for this, and that's good, we should have tons of ideas for it.
We'll definitely explore it.
All right, does anybody else have anything they wanna add at this point? Kurt, you have a
So do we have a history on how many holding cells we'll really need somewhere down the road, and some of these other things that are going inside there, or?
So the receiving cells, there's no magic number, we've always said 10% the amount of the bed count, that seems to be pretty consistent, right? So you have 80 beds, you have 8 receivers, if we have 50 beds, 5 receivers, right? It's not a magic number, but that obviously will reduce, if you're gonna go with a less bed count, we would see less receiving cells.
Well, cause I realize George gave us the tour, and I see his point that he's got problems right now with his 2. You know, how many do we need?
Two doesn't cut it, you know, and then obviously it doesn't go into the count that we're considering, but the padded cell, it really has a function. It's an expensive cell, but it's wise to put it in. It's a must. Yeah, so, it's things like that that will have to stay in. Sound good?
Just don't close any streets.
I have that down here, yeah.
So closing 2 is totally out of the question?
What's that?
Closing 2 streets then is totally out of the question?
Yes, 3.
Well, they don't know which one to complain about, so let's do 2 of them.
If no one else has anything to this or add or discuss, then, we need to set a, when would you guys be ready to meet again?
I guess it's a matter of if you want options with budget, it's gonna take longer. If you want just options to explore and then I follow up with the budget, we can meet sooner. So if you want the options with the number, then it's gonna take a longer period of time.
Well, I think we're at a point where, we'd like to see options with a number.
Okay.
Me personally, I don't know what the rest of you feel, but, I mean, it's gonna help us to make a decision.
And I think, December, I think is too early.
I
I think we should talk maybe January.
January, February,
Is that,
maybe, I don't
is
know.
that reasonable?
Yeah, I think if we did it right after the first of the year, we could get that done.
Okay.
January 1st open for everybody?
No, that's right.
Yes, they have to have, if you're running for board, you have to have it in that day, and the clerk has to be here to accept it on January, that's January 2nd.
Yeah.
Is it Thursday good again?
January 11th? 11th would work for me.
Won't work for me unless it's the afternoon.
Well, the
Afternoon's fine,
on the 11th? I guess that would work. Afternoon,
1 o'clock?
oh, perfect.
What date is that?
January 11th, that's a Thursday.
$11 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Or 1 o'clock?
We possibly could do it 11 o'clock, but that'd be the day Jeremy decides to talk a lot.
Yeah.
Well, that's every day.
1 o'clock, don't bother me.
So that being said, then, I decided to motion to adjourn.
Move. Second.
Motion, moving and seconding to adjourn, all in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks everyone, have a good holiday.
Thank you, you as well.
Yep.
If you're here, be safe.